April is Jazz Appreciation Month, and the JJA is honoring jazz heroes, the activists, advocates, altruists, aiders, and abettors of jazz in 27 localities across America, including U.S. cities, the San Diego-Tijuana borderland, and Guelph, Canada. For more information on jazz heroes and the upcoming annual JJA Jazz Award winners, visit our website at jjajazzawards.org.
Hello and welcome to a 2024 Jazz Journalists Association Book Awards author interview. I'm Brad Stone, here with Philip Arneill, author of Tokyo Jazz Joints. It's among 6 nominees in the category of history, criticism, and culture to be voted on by members of the Jazz Journalists Association, with winners to be announced on May 8th. Philip, welcome to the podcast. And this is The Buzz, by the way, our podcast. And so I was particularly excited when I learned about your book because I've been to Japan a few times. I've been, spent some time in Tokyo. I've experienced what you've documented a little bit there. And I've always intended to go back to Tokyo and experience more of these jazz cafes, so to speak. So I got excited about your book, and I had, an opportunity to. One of the other members of the Book Award Committee had a hard copy of your book, so I've got to experience it firsthand, and. It's really a lovely book, and the photographs are fantastic. But let me just start by asking you about your project. Maybe you can give a general description about it, and then we'll get into some more of the details.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the podcast, and also I'm delighted to be nominated in that category with so many other good books. So it's a real privilege to talk to you. And thanks to your kind words about the book as well. The book came out of an idea, as many books do, but way back in 2014, when I was down in Kyoto, sitting in a place called Hello Dolly, which does have a photograph just of the outside in the book. And I just kind of was overcome by this idea that these places, it was the kind of place that I just got the sense that it wasn't going to be around forever. And so I think the seed of this idea was planted there in terms of maybe documenting these spaces. And a lot of my photographic work is about documenting and particularly looking at cultures that are kind of declining or diminishing. But I had, honestly speaking, had very little knowledge. I was a jazz listener. I was a jazz fan, but I didn't have much knowledge of these spaces. I'd been, I think, in one or two way back when I first got to Japan, but at the time was less of a jazz fan, so it probably didn't resonate in the same way. And so I approached someone I knew through various club events in Tokyo called James Catchpole, who came to Japan around the same time as me, and I knew he'd been to these places. He actually had a kind of a listing site that he was putting together over the years. And I thought he would be a good person, to pick his brains. He would know what good places to go and photograph would be, perhaps places that were more at risk of closing. And so we met in late 2014 and had a chat. And I pitched this idea, and I've told this many times. He claims that he was very enthusiastic about it now, but I have a very distinct memory of coming away from that meeting and being a bit crestfallen, thinking, well, I thought that would be better received. But happily, we kept in touch, and in March 27th, 2015, we went to the first place called Pithecanthropus erectus, named after the Charles Mingus album, obviously down in a sort of a slightly down at heel station in Tokyo, southern Tokyo. And Yeah, I mean, from there it really just grew, and it was never really my intention to do a book initially. It was always just about documenting these places, and we go as customers, we enjoy the spaces, we chat with the owners, and then I ask permission to photograph. But as with many things, something that starts as an idea or starts as one event, it just became 10, 20, and then before you know it, you've been to 50 of these places, and then it was 100. And so it just gathered this kind of momentum, and James and I, our relationship also developed, and we became friends, and we continued the project. And I think at this point now, I've been to over about approximately 210 places and photographed them. Now, not all of those are in the book. I've subsequently photographed some since the book came out last year, but it's an ongoing project for me. And this book is one line that's drawn, but by no means is it the end of the project. But it just felt like it was the right time for the book to come out, so I drew from the photographs that have been taken since 2015.
So I take it that part of your impetus for doing this book is to document these establishments, and maybe we should talk a little bit about just what exactly they are, because it's kind of I don't want to say entirely unique thing to Japan, but it certainly is different, for instance, than what we have here in the States, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably argue that they are unique to Japan. Actually, I know in the recent years there's been this kind of explosion of listening spaces and hi-fi bars and music centered venues and things like that are distinct from clubs or distinct from DJ bars or live houses. But I think what we're talking about fundamentally. I mean, the project we named Tokyo Jazz Joints. That was kind of the name that I came up with, because I think it encapsulates the two main spaces that that are featured in the book. One is what's known as a jazz kisa, which is shorthand for kisaten, which means now, generally speaking, means coffee shop. The actual Chinese characters means tea drinking shop, but it's become kind of shorthand for coffee shop. So you're looking at a coffee shop type cafe space. And then also you have, I suppose, jazz bars, and they're distinct in the sense that they're more focused on alcohol. They often open at night, but it's really a combination of these two spaces, and what unites these spaces, whether you're going at 10 in the morning or you're going at 10 at night, is that, they're centered around jazz. They're traditionally set up for listening to music. They're not necessarily spaces for socializing. The music is the focus. They often have very high-end audio equipment, either very expensive stuff that's bought in, or in many cases things that the owners have kind of tweaked and created themselves. And then huge collections of vinyl. And then on top of that, you have a lot of this memorabilia from 10, 20, 30, 40 years. You have also the stories of the owners and famous jazz musicians coming to visit and people playing in Japan and all these kind of stories. So that's the spaces we're talking about. It's interesting. Kisa, the term kisa now has become it's being used a lot more. I notice, when you look at places online, people are presenting themselves as kisa, but certainly when it comes to the jazz kisa, the heyday was the 60s and 70s, and it was very much a place that you went in, you were discouraged from talking, shall we say. In some cases there were explicit talking bans at certain times of the day, if not the whole day, and it was very much about, you got your coffee, you sat down. The furniture, in fact, was often laid out to face the speaker, so almost like a church-like, kind of temple-like, setup. And also, particularly in the post-war years, these spaces were created out of necessity. People couldn't afford to buy records. They couldn't afford to buy hi-fi equipment for their own houses. So that's where you went to hear the latest jazz. That's where you learned about jazz. That's where, in many cases, the owners, pushed and encouraged you to follow their tastes, their genres, their favorite musicians. And you still see that today in a lot of the way the cafes are named, after jazz luminaries and sort of, the gods of the jazz canon.
So, documentation being, one purpose for this book, but do you feel that maybe another purpose might be, exposure? In other words, getting people to know more, to know about these things, and maybe support the ones that are left?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the raison d'etre for the project was to record as many of them as possible, and because they are closing a lot, and at a reasonably fast rate. You know, a lot of the owners are in maybe in their 60s, 70s, in some cases 80s. So it's not really sustainable, you know, and they're getting older, in some cases sicker. You know, sometimes wives or partners are taking them over. But generally speaking, you know, it's a culture that's in decline. Now, there's some positive signs. and I think part of that positivity is some places opening up with newer, younger owners. In some cases, owners, younger people taking over from older owners. That's not a direct result of Tokyo Jazz Joints as a project, but I do think it's been fundamental in increasing the awareness of jazz kisa culture worldwide. We do a podcast that accompanies the documentary photo side of the project, and that again, you know, has given us a really much more global listenership, and I think that has gone hand in hand with this increasing awareness of Japan as one. It's I think they just surpassed the record number of tourists now to Japan, and certainly it's gone back to the numbers that were seen before COVID. There's an increasing awareness of jazz kisa culture, which, you know, Tokyo Jazz Joints has certainly driven. And then also there's been this wave of Japanese interest in Japanese jazz as well, you know, with compilations from places like BBE Records and Jazzman Gerald and you know, Wah Jazz and these various compilations that are coming out. So I think all those things have kind of come together. But I think also for me, the third purpose of the project is to yes, raise awareness, but it's also, I think, as best as possible in the limited way that you can with a camera, is to give some sense of what it's like to be in those places. And that's why the book itself is not laid out like, it's not a guidebook. It was never intended to be a guidebook. It's first and foremost like an art photography book, and the choice of images and the way that they're sequenced are more to give you that sense of, you know, when you go into these places, what you can expect at the door, what you can expect going down the stairs, when you come into the interior, what you're going to see. And then also the kind of little trinkets and bits of memorabilia and jazz history that you'll see around the place as well. So, you know, that would be a third reason, I think, for me, because yes, some people have been to Japan. You mentioned yourself, you'd been. A lot of people are going, and it's amazing to me compared to 30 years ago, you know, how many people now say, oh, I'm going to Japan, or I've been to Japan. But, you know, the reality is it's still a long way away. A lot of people won't get the chance for whatever reason to be able to go and experience these places. So if they're able to do that in some way through the photographs, then that's fantastic. And we also then supplement the images with the podcast as well, where we often tell the stories behind, you know, going to visit some of these places, or a particularly quirky owner or something funny that happened in one of these places or on the way to one of these places. So it kind of brings the whole thing together and hopefully gives the listener and the viewer, you know, a more kind of experiential slice of that jazz kisa culture.
Well, I have to say that your photographs really do capture they capture the vibe of these places, but also the moment. You have a gift for really capturing the moment that I really enjoyed. So kudos to you for that. You know, you definitely have an eye for that aspect of it. But something that you said earlier, you know, you said you were talking about younger people, you know, maybe opening up some of these. That was actually going to lead into my next question is given that, you know, there's this sort of renewed interest. Well, I shouldn't even say renewed interest, because younger people, you know, with streaming services being so prevalent now, but young people gaining an interest in physical formats, LPs, and now CDs are making a bit of a comeback. If you think that, you know, there's the possibility of you know, a revival of these jazz joints in Tokyo and elsewhere, maybe it could even happen here.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I suppose revival's a tricky one, because you know, they've always been there in Japan. but having said that, and I've mentioned this already, they are declining for the reasons I've already said. Other things like gentrification as well being a good example, where somewhere's maybe existed for 20, 30 years in a particularly desirable area of the station. And then, the owner, whoever owns the building or the land, wants to kind of renew the building, or in some cases just rebuild it. And so there's maybe no place for the jazz kisa or the jazz bar that's been there. I think, there are some really good examples. Masako is one, which is not in this book, but if there's a second book, will definitely be in there. It's an old legendary place that was in a neighborhood called Shimokitazawa. It actually closed for that reason, gentrification, of building the station area out, creating this big, shopping mall. But a lot of the stuff from it was kept, and actually a young female owner has reopened Masako, same font, same sign, a lot of the same furniture, speakers, music, and then she's also playing, newer jazz, but it's a lot more of a welcoming space probably for younger people, also for women, because traditionally these spaces would have been quite kind of male coded, I think, so they weren't almost the most welcoming places for women, particularly on their own. James and I often joke in the podcast about the not necessarily being a place that you would go to have a meal either, but there are places like Masako, for example. She serves a very nice homemade curry. There's another place not far from there, a young guy who's very into English audio systems and jazz as well, and he is also a big fan of hot dogs. So he opened a place called Tonlist, which is basically jazz and hot dogs. And so you go in there, there's 4 or 5 seats, you have a hot dog, you have a cocktail, and you're just blasted by jazz as you eat and drink. And so there's a sense of, some evolution there, I think, which will obviously bode well for the future of Jazz Kisa. I think overall, just the sheer number of places and the fact that they're run by men and women, who are in the latter stages of their life, means that it's going to ultimately decrease in number over the years. However, again, this interest in jazz, Japan, in vinyl, and these physical formats, like, these are all elements that will contribute perhaps to the slowing down of that culture declining, I think. And then also, people going to visit. So, I get a lot of messages from people online through Instagram and so on. Oh, I'm going to Tokyo. Have you got any recommendations? And, could you give me a few places to go? And so that also, I think, will help maintain interest in those places as well. But traditionally, they have this kind of reputation, jazz in Japan, as popular and as embedded in the culture it is. It's always had a slightly... what's the best word to describe it? It's always had a sort of an air of danger, or the sort of an edge, which also happened in other countries, right? Particularly when jazz was really coming through as a musical genre. And certainly the jazz kisa, there's a very distinct idea, particularly amongst older people, of this being this kind of very dark, unwelcoming space. And even more recently, having been to a couple of places down in Osaka, the owners very vehemently argued that, we are not a jazz kisa, because they characterized this themselves as sort of a dark space with a lot of old men just with their heads down, nodding and not speaking to anyone and being very antisocial. And so I think, there's that kind of traditional view of these places that you're battling against as well. But there are signs, and there's a very, for me, poignant photo in the book of a place called Yuha, which is a very new place. It's younger owners. They serve nice food. They have Wi-Fi. There's lots of books there. It's very bright and airy. And there's the picture, I just happened to capture a young woman going in through the door. So she's sort of halfway through the door. And to me, that really kind of said a lot about these more forward-looking, kind of evolving jazz kisa, as opposed to the more traditional places that existed, certainly back in the 60s and 70s.
Well, it's nice to hear, because it seems as though it's evolving, and there's at least some hope for these places to continue to exist and evolve into something more modern or nicer or more inclusive, perhaps. I just find it fascinating in Japan, and there's still a very strong interest in Japan for physical product. We're seeing here in the United States, we're seeing a bit of a revival of that as well. as I mentioned. But in Japan, it's always been, there's been a strong market there. And I just think it's this interesting juxtaposition, because when you think about Japan and, one of the centers in the world for high tech, right? And yet there's this still strong interest for the physical product. So
I think that's one of the contradictions of Japan. I think that there is this image of it being a very high tech place, but if you've lived there, you, you come up against a lot of analog stuff, and not in a good way. A lot of form filling, a lot of physical stamping of things. Convenience stores still have fax machines. I mean, I don't know who's faxing who, but so there's always this contrast, and then there's also this incredible efficiency. Where you can go to like an ATM and do everything, pay your bills and put in coins and do all these different things. So it's always this kind of contrast, but you're right in saying, that analog, that physical thing. I mean, anyone who buys records as well, knows Japan is the place to go. And it's a case of, if you go to Japan, it's kind of, when will I find something I'm looking for, rather than if, and that's not an experience that is necessarily the same in America or Europe. I mean, again, there's been a revival of vinyl, but so there is definitely that interest in the physical side of things for sure. Yeah.
Well, Philip, I'm going to give you the last couple of minutes to make any kind of concluding remarks that you'd like to make about the book. One thing I'll just mention: I'm looking forward to there being a second volume. So I hope that's going to happen. But
if you could call my publisher, that'd be great. Tell them you're looking forward to. We get that critical mass.
I will do that when I order a copy for myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a real whirlwind for me, this book. Like I said at the start, I wasn't planning to put out a book, but funnily enough, not long after exhibiting some of the photos, and as the website went up, people would say, "Well, when are you going to do a book?" And it was always really about finances, and there were opportunities to do something, and I really held off because I wanted to do it right. And I wanted to do it properly. And in the end, I sent out some proposals to publishers, and Kara Verlag, who's the German publisher that released the book, have just been incredible to work with. It was a very collaborative process. I was never forced to do anything or kind of make decisions, under pressure. And the success of it has just been such a privilege, to see. And I think it's testament to, we had that audience that we built up through the podcast and COVID in particular, but just also the interest and the love that exists there for jazz kisa culture around the world. I mean, it's really quite astonishing. And when the initial book, we had to match fund some of the publishers' costs, so which is quite common now with photography books. So I did a fundraiser campaign, and I was quite nervous about it at the time, but we got 100% of the funding in 5 days, and then the campaign ran for another 21 days, which seemed endless, but we ended up with 200% funding, which allowed us to really make the book that we wanted to do, which is why it has this textured cover and the slipcase. And so it's just been fantastic. I mean, it's in second edition now. It's going hopefully into third edition quite soon, in less than a year. So it just shows the interest that's there in this kind of analog culture, in Japanese culture, in jazz kisa culture. And I'm just so thrilled to be part of, being able to promote that awareness and kind of share that. And comments like you've made about the photographs, really, I mean, it's very humbling, because I came to photography, like so many things in my life, sort of just kind of stumbling in at the start, and sort of like, oh, this is quite good. And similarly with the book, it was a sort of a holy grail in some ways. And then now that it's out there, and seeing that in the world, it's really a dream come true. And to be nominated then for this, on top of that, is just fantastic. So I'm very grateful to all the people who supported in the making of the book, and all the people who have supported in promoting it and buying it around the world. It's fantastic.
Well, Philip, I want to congratulate you on your nomination for Jazz Journalists Association Book of the Year in our History, Criticism, and Culture category. And your book, Tokyo Jazz Joints, congratulations once again. We've been joined by Philip Arneill, author of Tokyo Jazz Joints. And by the way, Philip's joining us from Ireland, so thank you for, we've got an 8-hour time difference here between you and me, so thank you for spending part of your evening with us. So the book is a nominee for Book of the Year to be voted on by members of the Jazz Journalists Association. You can see the winners at www.jjajazawards.org on May 8th. That's when the winners will be announced. And hear other interviews with nominated authors on other episodes of The Buzz. I'm Brad Stone, and you've been listening to The Buzz, the podcast of the Jazz Journalists Association. This edition has been edited by Wiz Petta, with John Michael's composition Big Vic as our theme music. I'm Brad Stone. Check back for more of The Buzz.